Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new TEAM Therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Welcome to episode 55 of the Feeling Good podcast. We're going to continue on the interpersonal model. And last week we left people kind of in a cliffhanger on how do we deal with this ambivalence between the desire for love and the loving relationship and the desire for power. At least that's what I called it. So you're going to tell us today about the three premises for the TEAM interpersonal model, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's really fun doing this with you, Fabrice. I really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you all for listening. When I saw that my own cognitive approach was not effective for troubled couples, and then I began, going to workshops all around the country, and people would say, oh, here's how you get the love you need, and here's how you develop loving relationships. And I would try all of these behavioral techniques and cognitive techniques and interpersonal techniques, and I was just having a 0%, and meanwhile the research was 0% success, and the research was also showing that these techniques are not very effective, and the reason is because they're based on teaching people the methods they need to make a troubled relationship more loving, and so all the techniques are very logical and clever and appealing, but it doesn't address the basic issue. If you want to get close to that person, and if you're being rewarded by all those lower forces of blame and truth and revenge and hidden agendas and all the others that we talked about last time. So eventually I developed an entirely new approach to treating troubled relationships, and there are three assumptions. Number one is that it's kind of a Buddhist idea, a Christian idea. It's probably embedded into just about every religion, but it's that we create the very problem in our relationships that we're complaining about, that we're actually forcing, if you want to use strong language, the other person to treat us in exactly the way that we don't like, but we don't realize that we're causing them to do that. So we see ourselves as helpless victims of the other person's badness, because we're looking at all the things that they're doing wrong, and we can't see or don't want to see what we're doing to provoke them. That's the first assumption.
Is that like the self-fulfilling prophecy we were talking about last time?
That has to do with it, but it's well, yes, it would be somewhat similar to that. Yes, okay. Yes, absolutely. Sure. We think they're treating us badly, so we retaliate and we behave in various ways that cause them to keep doing that to us.
Yeah, it's like a vicious circle.
Yeah, and I'll give you a dramatic example of that in just a moment. The second principle, and that first one is a kind of a negative blow on humankind. It's just saying that there's a dark side to us, and that we're causing conflicts with others but not noticing it. That's the first principle.
Well, actually, I see this as really positive personally, because if I'm creating it, then that means I have a chance to do something about it.
That's the enlightenment, the part of it. That's principle 3 that we'll come to.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I'm burning this.
It's great. I mean, because you're right on target with what you're saying, which makes it fun to dialogue with you and to do these podcasts, actually. And people comment. I get emails all the time from people saying how much they enjoy you and the interaction between the two of us. The second principle is that we don't. This is even worse. See, the first principle would be forgivable if we were willing to look at our role and to change and grow. We would be bad, but we would have redemption or salvation or hope. The second principle is that we don't want to see our role in the problem, that we want to remain in that victim role all the while doing our dirty work in the dark. In other words, we want to keep away from our conscious awareness what we're doing. We don't want to examine our role and have revealed to us what we're doing that causes the other person to treat us badly.
Yeah, nobody likes to look at their shadow.
That's a Jungian point of view, and that's absolutely right. Again, I love your comments. And then the third principle is that we have vastly more power than we think if we're willing to stop blaming the other person, instead pinpoint our own role in the problem, focus all of our energies on changing ourselves rather than trying to change the other person. That amazing things can happen, and relationships that have been troubled for years can improve in a brief time, in a flash, in just a matter of a minute or something like that. And it's a fantastic experience, but there's a steep price that involves the death of the ego, and that's a very painful death. That's again one of the things that the Buddhists referred to as the great death. There's actually several varieties of death of the ego, but this is one of the most painful of all.
And now you're going to explain what you mean by that?
I will, but I'm going to go back to the first principle first. Just what I mean in a nutshell is that when you see your own role after blaming the other person for 20 years, and you suddenly see that you're causing it, it's shameful. It shatters the way you've been thinking about things, and it's a total blow to your pride, that you thought you were this wonderful person who was a victim, and then you suddenly see your shadow.
Right.
And it's painful because we don't like to see the dark, sleazy, unpalatable part of our personality, of our self. So the first thing that we're causing our own problems. And I had a fellow, and I love this guy's details a little bit, but he had been treated unsuccessfully by a pretty high-powered colleague. The fellow did require some medications, and this was in my psychopharmacology days and also in my early cognitive therapy days. And I made a small adjustment to his medications, and he did very well after about 3 weeks. And I thought then he'd want to drop out of therapy and go back to his original therapist, psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And he said, well, Dr. Burns, could I stay and work with you for, growth purposes, so-called growth purposes? And I said, well, I don't do growth purposes, but if you have something specific you want to work on, it'd be a pleasure to work with you on that. And he said, well, what he wanted help with was his troubled marriage. And he said he was all fed up with his wife, and that she never wanted to have sex, and that when they went out with other couples, she didn't brag about him, didn't seem proud of him, that there was constant conflict between the two of them. And he was quite a successful businessman, but at the end of the month, he'd find out she'd been spending money on the credit cards and not telling him, running up big bills. And he was just very, very, very frustrated. And he said this had been going on for 17 years. And he was kind of an obsessive fellow. And so he used to take notes every day of the things that she'd done wrong. Uh-huh. And so he would bring his
about blaming, systematic
a blame book, and he would bring it to sessions. And his idea of growth purposes was to sit and read to me, what she did on this day and what she did on this day. And he'd say, "Isn't that terrible? Don't I deserve better?" And we were visiting Disney World with the girls down in Florida, and can you believe that she said blah blah blah, and it was hot, and I was just trying to turn on the air conditioner in the car, and she wanted the windows open, and it was just hot and terrible, and I told her that she was wrong, and this type of thing. And after a few weeks, I got to think, my gosh, where is this thing going? How long is he going to be doing this? His book was pretty thick, 17 years worth of complaining. And so I said to him, George, I tell you, let's do a little kind of thought experiment here. Let's imagine that the mafia comes to you and says they have a proposal for you. They have. Well, let's say first of all, let's imagine that your wife, we have a magic wand and we can turn her into the woman of your dreams, and she's gorgeous and loves having sex with you and brags about you, and we're out to dinner and just, doesn't spend money behind your back, and just she's the dream wife. And then the mafia come to you, and we had mafia in Philadelphia. I had to treat the wife of one of the head mafia guy. It was so creepy. Yeah. Frightening.
Analyze this.
Yeah, she wanted to know why one of her sons was turning violent.
I can't think of any reason.
But anyway, we had the mafia, so I said, George, let's imagine that the mafia comes to you and they say, we've got a proposition for you. We've set aside $50,000, and if you can ruin your marriage in 1 month, we'll give you the $50,000. But if you don't succeed in ruining your marriage, your beautiful, idyllic marriage, we're going to give it to a hitman who's going to come and break your kneecaps and then put a bullet through your head. Yeah. So could you make a list for homework of 5 things that you could do in that month to ruin your marriage and save your life? And get that $50,000. Well, he got very excited about this homework assignment.
That sounds like a great technique. I need to write it down.
Yeah, right. So he came back the next week. He actually had 10 things on his list. And so he's all eager to read them to me. And he said, now the first one on my list is that my wife's father was a violent alcoholic. And so she had a terrible childhood and she hates alcohol. So one thing I could do is stop at the bar and get drunk on the way home. And so when I walk in the door, I'd have alcohol on my breath, and that would shock her and disturb her. And then I would tell her she's being uptight and pour another drink right in front of her and drink it. That would be one thing I could do. And then a second thing, and that he said, I'm sure that would ruin my marriage. And then a second thing I could do, I could have affairs with women all around the country on my business trips. Mm-hmm. Have sex with them and have girlfriends. And then I could come home with lipstick on my collar and show tickets in my pocket. So she would catch on to the fact that I was having affairs. Yeah. And that would crush her. And then a third thing I could do is that she only went to junior college and was never very confident about her intellectual ability. Of course, I'm an attorney and a businessman, and I'm pretty high-powered. And so when we go out to dinner with other couples, she tries to watch CNN or read Time magazine so she can read up on world events and make some intelligent comment at dinner time because she feels inferior, intellectually inferior. And then I could make fun of her comment and put her down in front of our friends, and that would humiliate her. And then when the daughters come to me, and complain, oh, Mommy said we have to do this or that, I could just sabotage her and just say, oh, you don't have to listen to your mommy. She doesn't know what she's talking about. You just do it whatever you want. And
so he was pretty savvy about how to ruin his marriage.
Yeah, so he had this whole list of 10 things. And so then I said, now how effective do you think these things would be in ruining your marriage? And he says, oh, Dr. Burns, I think it'd be totally successful. I think if I even did any one thing of the 10 things on this list would be enough to ruin my marriage.
Yeah.
And then I said, and now just between you and me, George, how many of these things are you doing already? And he said, oh, all of them. So here's a guy
including the affairs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was having affairs, and he was coming home drunk every night and, putting her down in front of friends. And he'd been doing this for 17 years. Mm-hmm. And all this time he's complaining, my wife isn't loving. She doesn't want to have sex. She's angry with me. Yeah. And he seemed totally oblivious to the fact that he sees himself as a victim of her badness. And that's the first principle of that we're doing this and we seem to be unaware of it. And that's an extreme example.
It's an extreme example for sure.
But it's something that happens to all of us whenever we're in conflict. In a future podcast, we can even prove it to the listeners that all of you are actually involved in this same type of phenomenon. Now, do we have time for the second principle?
Yeah.
Okay. The second principle is that we don't want to know about our role in the problem. We want to do our dirty work in the dark so we can maintain this facade of innocence. A woman came to me, well, let's call her Sarah, and she'd had 25 years of failed therapy for depression. She'd had hospitalizations, and so she was referred to me. And at the very first session, she said she was already feeling better because she found out why she'd been depressed. And I said, well, why is that? And she said, well, I read an article in Cosmopolitan magazine called Loneliness in Marriage. And I found out that women all over America like me who are married are lonely, and that the reason is because men can't express their feelings, and that's that Deborah Tan and John Gray thing. Yeah. And my husband, she said, is just like that. His name is John. He's an accountant, and he can't express his feelings. And I've been trying all day, every day for 25 years to get him to express his feelings, but he can't express his feelings. He won't express his feelings. He's a hopeless case. I've tried everything. Nothing works. And that's why I've been so depressed, suicidal at times, because I'm married, but I'm terribly lonely, and it's all my husband's fault.
Yeah.
So I said, well, if that's the problem, why don't we get him in here? We'll do a little couples therapy, and we can help him express his feelings, help you both with communication. And she started to bristle. And got kind of annoyed with me and said, I told you, Dr. Burns, I've tried everything and nothing works. He's a hopeless case. There's no point in having him come in for a session. And I said, well, gosh, Sarah, would you be willing to have him come in for just one session so I could see what happens when the two of you try to communicate, and then I'd have a better understanding,
right?
Even if you decide not to work as a couple. So she begrudgingly brought him in the next week, and I was very curious to meet this cold accountant fellow who can't deal with feelings. And he was surprisingly cordial and said he was aware of the problems, and he was relieved to have the chance to become a part of the therapy, and he was very motivated to try to improve things. Now, I tried a very simple form of marital therapy 101, and I didn't use it for treatment purposes, but for diagnostic purposes.
Yeah, to see how they were, interacting.
Yes, and I explained to both of them to have a really loving relationship, you have to be able to do two things. You have to be able to share your feelings so your partner can understand how you feel, and you also have to be able to listen when your partner expresses feelings. And so let's see if the two of you can do that. And I want you, Sarah, to start out. You can be the talker. And you, John, are going to be the listener. And Sarah, you, for 30 seconds, can talk about anything you want. You can just share your feelings. Now, while you speak, John will not respond. But, John, I want you to listen attentively, use nice, receptive body language. And all you have to do is listen to what Sarah is saying. And then when she's done, I want you to repeat it as accurately as you can. Repeat her words so she knows that you heard exactly what she said. Right,
little listening.
Yes, that's right. And then acknowledge how you think she's feeling given the words that she used, given the things that she said to you. And then we'll find out if you, Sarah, can express your feelings. We'll find out if you, John, can be a good listener. Then we'll do a role reversal.
Yeah.
So they were both pleased to do this, and she started out and said, John, I want you to know that for 25 years I've been trying to get you to express your feelings. And I've been trying all day, every day. But you won't express your feelings. You can't express your feelings. You're just cold. You're an accountant. You're a man. You played with trucks when you were little. And you don't know how to deal with the feelings. And that's why I've got loneliness in marriage. And that's when I've been depressed and sometimes suicidal for the last 25 years. And it's all your fault. So he's listening patiently. And I said, now, John, see if you can repeat Sarah's words and acknowledge how she's feeling. So he said, well, Sarah, what I heard you saying right now is that you've been trying all day, every day for 25 years to get me to express my feelings. But you've tried everything and nothing works. And that's because I'm an accountant, because I'm a man, because men can't deal with feelings, and because I played with trucks when I was little. And as a result of the fact that I can't express feelings or deal with feelings, you're feeling extremely lonely, and we have a bad marriage because you have loneliness in marriage. And it's also why you've been depressed and suicidal at times. And you're probably also extremely angry with me and resentful, and that I'm to blame, not only for our troubled marriage, but also for your depression.
Right, so he repeated that just fine.
Yeah, perfectly.
Excellent empathy.
And so I said to her, now give him a score between 0 and 100%. How accurately did he get it? And she said, oh, well, that was 95 or 100%.
Okay, so she recognized that. No.
Yeah. And so I said, okay, we've determined now, Sarah, that you're really good at expressing your feelings, and you, John, are just a fantastic listener. Now let's do a role reversal. And now, John, I want you to express whatever you want for the next 30 seconds. And Sarah, I want you to be a good listener. You don't have to agree with him. You don't have to disagree with him. Just show good body language. Just listen to his words. Just like a court reporter. You just want to get what he said, reflect it back to him, and tell him how you think he's probably feeling. And so they both agreed. And so he started out by saying, you know, Sarah, what you've been saying is that you've been trying all day, every day to get me to express my feelings. And what I want you to know is I can express my feelings, and I can do that at any moment, and try to do that virtually every day. And I'm going to try to do it here one more time, and tell you what my feelings are right at this very moment. Because I also feel frustrated and angry and lonely. And the reason is because every time I try to express my feelings, you tell me to shut up, or you tell me I'm saying the wrong thing. So I feel like I'm between a rock and a hard place. I'm damned if I do, and I'm damned if I don't. Yeah. And while he was speaking, she started shaking her head in that negative, judgmental way, and started pointing her finger at him like this in this real angry way. And then she stood up and she put her finger right up to his nose, and she said, "You shut the F up. I won't stand for this garbage that's coming out of your mouth. You shut up." And then she walked out of the office door and slammed the door shut. Yeah. This blew my mind. And I got up and opened the door, and there she was sitting in the waiting room with her arms folded defiantly across her chest, and said, would you want to come in and process, what just happened? And she said, absolutely not. And so John and I did our best to, use up the rest of the time. She came in the next week without him, and triumphantly announced that it was exactly as she had predicted, that during the week he'd been unable to express his feelings, and that my therapeutic efforts had failed, and that and I said to her, now, Sarah, could we stop here for a moment? Did you notice what happened last week when he did try to express his feelings? And she said, Dr. Burns, if you ever raise this topic again, I'm going to walk right out of this door, and you're never going to see me again. You shut the F up.
Oh, really? She said that to you?
Yeah. And so that's the second principle, is that, you see, in the first place, she's causing the very problem that she's complaining about. She attacks him every time he tries to express his feelings, which we could forgive her for and teach her how to stop doing if it weren't for the second principle, which is that she doesn't want that pointed out. She wants to do her dirty work in the dark, which is a very condemning view of human nature. And
again, another extreme example.
Yes, an extreme example, but it's something that happens to all of us. I see that in myself when I'm in conflict with my students, with my family, with my loved ones, with anyone. I just want to blame that other person, and I don't want to have to look at my own role because it feels shameful. It feels extremely painful. And the last principle is the positive one, that we have way more power than we think to heal troubled relationships, often with amazing speed and in a way that leaves little or nothing to be desired. But there is a price to be paid, which involves pinpointing our own role in the problem and focusing entirely on changing ourselves. And we can focus on exactly how to do that in the upcoming podcasts.
All right. Well, that will be revealed next time. And I will encourage our listeners to send us questions. They can leave that in the show notes on feelinggood.com. And I look forward to seeing what to do with this.
Thanks, Fabrice. It's always a joy working with you. And again, if any of listeners want to go to my website, feelinggood.com, at the workshop page, I've got 3 upcoming workshops on the East Coast soon on relationship conflicts. It's All Your Fault workshop. It's a 2-day workshop for mental health professionals. So if you're at all interested in this theme, take a look. Also, you can pick up my book, Feeling Good Together, which is on the very model we're talking about in these podcasts.
Thank you, David. Talk to you next time.
Okay. Thanks, Fabrice.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donzel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. Are you masturbating again?